Hey everyone, Leo is here, another Jumpstart Lightning episode, and I have Meagan here with me to talk to me about the Arc Multicloud connector. Stay tuned. Hey everyone, Leo is here, another Jumpstart Lightning episode, and I have Meagan here with me. Meagan, how are you doing, my friend?
Yeah, I'm excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
Meagan, you're a returning guest. We had an episode a few months back. It's always fun to have a returning guest. Today, Meagan, we're here to talk about the Arc Multicloud connector. But before we go and nerd out on all those good things, who you are, what is it that you do?
Yeah, so my name is Meagan McCrory, and I'm a product manager on the Azure Arc platform team. And my focus over the last year has been multi-cloud and how we can actually help our multi-cloud customers better manage their workloads on Azure.
Meagan, multi-cloud, it's an interesting term. When we started the Arc journey more than 5 years ago at this point, kind of hard to imagine. Multi-cloud was always there. We always talked about the notion of hybrid and multi-cloud, and in past years, we also started to talk about the edge, to the point that today we're talking about all this stuff in the context of adaptive cloud, but want to focus on the multi-cloud aspect today with you. And, the multi-cloud thing is a very interesting one because until today, we're going to talk about the connector today, but until today, multi-cloud was always about like very kind of non-control plane approach, I want to say, in the sense that there was no dynamic notion of getting resources to Azure. It was always about, the agents. It was always about like manual operations or some automations that the customers were doing. But with multi-cloud, that's different, right?
Yeah, exactly. And so this is where, from the multi-cloud approach, we really want to make this similar or really lightweight for customers to be able to connect to their other public cloud estates and project things in Azure. And so it's kind of a new way that allows customers to easily connect to their other public cloud environments, but without sort of that heavy lift. Like before today, it's been a lot of manual. Like I've got to go and manually install an agent on all of my machines that I want to connect. And we're basically really trying to make that easier with what we're going to talk about today, which I'm excited about.
Yeah. So we're already seeing the slide that you have there. And, I was curious about, just kind of the motivation, the use cases and all that. So let's talk about that.
Yeah, so I would say over the calendar year 2023, our team invested a lot of time in just understanding how customers approach their multi-cloud strategies. What's really the driving factors to ensure that their workloads are multi-cloud? When do they choose one cloud over another? But with all of this, we also drilled into their pain points. What's difficult for customers today who have multi-cloud environments? And so with that, a lot of the pain that we've heard from customers is just really the ability to even understand what is all deployed in all of my environments. That oftentimes is hard for customers to go and look at because different teams own different parts. There might have an Azure team, an AWS team, and so on. But for the centralized team, how can I actually keep track of things? And this is where we want to make it really easy for customers. And so what we've done is we basically have built a really lightweight way for customers to go and once again connect to their other source cloud environments. And then with that, we can set up an auto discovery service that can now project everything that you have inside of your source cloud environment to Azure with all of that rich metadata that's attached to that. And so that makes it really seamless for customers now to actually go and say, hey, show me all of my virtual machines in Azure and in AWS with this tag. And so that makes it just really easy for customers to go and now query. But then, of course, if we want to take it a step further, for the things that can actually be Arc enabled, like virtual machines, how can we make that really easy for us to go and do? And so by Arc enabling it, customers can now leverage Azure monitoring, update manager, so they have a single way that they can really manage their cross-cloud estate. But with that, we want to just make it really easy where our service can actually go and onboard you to Arc and install that agent. So now customers don't have to take that burden on themselves. So really, our whole goal is just to make it easier for customers with multi-cloud environments to see things in Azure, their entire public cloud estate, as well as now leverage more Azure management services through Arc for the eligible resource types.
I loving it. It's kind of interesting to see the evolution. I remember when we started talking about the multi-cloud, and we always talked with this term projecting resources, right? That's a term that I've been using, I believe, since day one, since started working on Azure Arc. And it was always there, but I like to see the evolution of how we're making it easier to project these resources, that lightweight, that auto discovery methods, all this stuff. So I'm loving it.
Yeah, I love it. And that's where I think really kind of showcasing how we're set up will make things just make a little bit more sense before we actually show it off inside the portal. And so here's sort of our solution architecture. And so coming into this as a customer, one thing that we want to make sure that we do is keep everything up to date. So you actually have a source of truth that you can pull from when it comes to really using this as an inventory service. And so with that, what happens here is we basically have this continuation syncs with all of the AWS APIs. And so here you can actually see we get access via the CloudFormation templates. So this is basically how we federate our application to be able to read from your account. And then once we have that access, we now basically can query, we can do a get call on all of these different resources that are deployed. So EC2 instances, S3 buckets, Lambda functions, and so on. So today we support over 50 of these resource types. And then what's nice is that once we actually can recognize, oh, okay, Leor has an S3 bucket, and here's all of the metadata that's returned inside of that get S3 bucket call, that now will get back up to our service here under the hybrid connectivity. So this is where our connector is. We will basically now go and project those resources. So under now the Microsoft.aws connector, you'll actually see Leor's S3 bucket and the time it was created and any S3 bucket tags you might have. And then similar for the EC2 instances that we discover, once again, if you opt in for that Arc onboarding solution, you'll actually now see this connected to Arc on already all set up for you. And so that makes it just really nice and simple for customers. And then, of course, that richness comes with, once again, that query capability. And so now I can come in and I can say, show me all of my storage accounts across AWS and Azure. And so it makes it really easy for customers to come in and immediately start drilling into these queries. For instance, maybe there is a vulnerability on a certain version of Windows, and you need to go and find out what all VMs are running this version of Windows. You can now do that from a single pane through the Azure Resource Graph, because all of this information is now being captured for both your Azure environment and your AWS environment.
So, Meagan, this is great, and I'll tell you what I'm taking out of this. Right, couple of things. First of all, inventory was always part of the bread and butter story of Azure Arc. Right, that's how it started. Like, you have inventory management, but this is taking it one step further, because just having an inventory of Arc-enabled servers in this case, right, or Kubernetes clusters with Arc-enabled Kubernetes and so forth, that's one thing. But when you're starting to think about, and that's where I'm connecting the second point here, when you're starting to think about all things APIs, right, that's how you get there. Like, because before the multi-cloud connector, there was no really notion of talking to other cloud providers API. It was always agent-based kind of discovery. And that's, I think, the real evolution of the approach that we're starting to take here.
You're exactly right. And this is where our team has spent a lot of time to better understand just how we can scale to actually support all of these resource types through the APIs. And so making it a really lightweight connection where we're just doing a read-only call to the APIs, getting all of this data, and then projecting them as Azure resources. So it's all there for you. And so this is definitely something that we spent a lot of time on, just how can we automate this? Because we really want to scale out. We don't want to just have inventory for a couple resource types, but we want to make sure that you have a source of truth that is complete. And so that's really a main focus and a goal for our team here. So I'm excited to show it off.
I love it. Show me the magic.
All right. So here I am inside of the Azure portal. And so I'm just going to now come over to the Azure Arc Played. And now on the overview under the management, you're going to see something new here called the Multicloud connector. And so if I click this, you'll notice that I already have some connectors that are available, but let's actually go and create one and see what it looks like. So now I've actually am on the add AWS connector, and I'm going to go ahead and create a new resource group, and I'm just going to call it Jumpstart demo. And now I'm going to go and actually give it my connector name, and I'm just going to say connector 1. And so basically this is an ARM resource. And once again, this ARM resource will now hold my AWS account information. And so I'm already logged into AWS. So now I'm on the AWS portal, and I'm going to go ahead and grab my account ID. And so I went ahead and copied that. And so I'm going to paste that here in the chat or in the text box. And so now I've got my AWS account that I want to connect to. And so we support both single accounts and organizational accounts on the AWS side. And then after that, we'll actually go to the solutions. So this is really the meat of our product. And so here you'll notice that we have two solutions that are available. One is inventory. So once again, it's that lightweight way that we can actually project all of your resources in Azure to give you that inventory richness through Azure Resource Graph. And then we have the Arc onboarding. So once again, the ability to easily Arc enable your EC2 machines that are in your AWS environment. And so here I'm going to go ahead and click on the ad for inventory. And you'll notice that we have the AWS services. So if I select this, you'll notice we've got 26. And so you'll see things across EC2, Lambda, Lightsail, RDS, Redshift, S3. And so there's a bunch of different services that we basically can collect information from for the resources that map up to these services. Once again, this list will continue to grow as our service matures. But with that, I'm just going to keep everything as is. And then next up is the periodic sync. So this is how often do you want our service to connect to your AWS environment and make sure everything is correct. And so for instance, maybe your state of your EC2 machine has changed. Maybe you have stopped it. And so we want to be able to reflect that on the Azure side. Or maybe you added a tag or you changed your VPC ID, whatever it might be. We just want to make sure things stay consistent on the Azure side. So we highly recommend keeping the periodic sync turned on. Otherwise, you might get stale resources. But with that, you can change the schedule. So if you only want us to pull once a day, you could do 24 hours. But I'm going to keep mine for an hour at this point in time. And then last but not least are the region filters. And so for instance, right now we support most of the AWS global regions. We are planning on supporting all of them. But with this, if for some reason you didn't want us to pull from a certain region, you can always deselect it. And that's it for configuring inventory. After that, you can configure your Arc onboarding settings. And so here I'm going to go ahead and here I can choose my connectivity method. So how do I actually want my machine to be connected? So after I choose this, I'm just going to leave it to public endpoint. But after that, once again, I have that periodic sync. So again, in order for us to make sure that we're catching all of your EC2 machines, so maybe you deployed a new machine, we want to be able to stay consistent. And we want to make sure all of your EC2 machines that you want to be Arc enabled are Arc enabled. And so once again, having this periodic sync turned on is important here. And then last but not least are the resource filters. So for again, if you don't want us to onboard the Arc agent to your EC2 machines in a certain region, you could filter those out. Similarly, we do want to make sure that for your EC2 machines that you want to have the Arc agent on, we want to make sure that you have a ability to basically filter for those. So today inside of public preview, we actually require customers to add a tag with the key as Arc in order for us to really pick it up and be able to install the Arc agent. We do plan on relaxing this here in the future and actually letting you define what your filters should be based off a tag. So maybe if it's the owner is Lior and you want all of those to be Arc enabled, you can do so. But right now, this is hard coded to the word Arc. So that's it for the resource filters. After you have selected your settings, next up is the authentication part. But before jumping ahead, any questions from your side, Lior?
Yeah, not questions, just, a lot of observations,
Yeah.
And, to share with you one of those observations, what a time to be alive when you see in the Azure portal, AWS, metadata resource information. So that's kind of, definitely funky for folks that are not familiar with the direction, not familiar with Arc. But this is what we do. I mean, I think that it's crazy that we start seeing that. And I think that another thing here to share with you, Meagan, is that I actually see a lot of opportunities here because right now the service is in preview. But as we're getting more mature, I would love, to hear about, how customers will think about the more possibilities that they're thinking about in the context of other AWS services and Arc integrations that might pop as part of the conversations that we're having with customers, and not just in the notion of Arc-enabled servers.
Yeah, I absolutely love it. And this is where, once again, our whole notion is we just want to meet customers where they are and be able to actually provide them with the services that they need. And so I'm really excited that we have the support, and I'm excited to even see this list grow. Right now, we have 2 solutions, but we're even working with other partner teams to even provide more multi-cloud capabilities based off of the customer feedback that we're getting. And so definitely stay tuned. This is just sort of the beginning where we are with multi-cloud. So it's definitely an exciting time.
I'm loving it.
Awesome. Well, next up, so after you select your solutions, next up is the authentication. And so, how we authenticate to AWS is through the CloudFormation template. And so, this basically allows us for our offering, we basically have the OIDC Federation, and this is how we actually can connect to AWS. And so, with this, after you've downloaded the template, you'll actually go and open up the stack inside of AWS. You can create a new stack. And here you can actually just easily upload the template file. And so after you select your file, after downloading, it makes it really easy. You can just keep everything as the default after you provide a stack name. So I'm just going to call this demo.js. This is where you actually see the IAM roles that get created. And so for asset management, this is the inventory. So that's that read-only access role. The Arc for server is that ability for us to have the EC2 write access so we can actually go and make sure that we can install the Arc agent. And then after that, it just is really easy. You can come through and just go ahead and click all of these next buttons to download and run this template inside of your CloudFormation stack. So now that this create is in progress, I'm going to come back over to the Azure portal and go ahead and finish up my create on the connector. So here I am going to go ahead and do the review and create. And so now the deployment is already in progress, and we can easily see that we have the connector here, which is exciting. It succeeded. Under my deployment, I can actually see the connector was created and these two solutions were created. And so if you even browse to this connector, you'll notice that right now, I feel like if I do a refresh, yeah, it even says success. So it's exciting that we can actually see these come through just automatically that easy. But with that, I do want to just deep dive a little bit further into sort of how we're doing this behind the scenes. I want to make sure that we sort of address how we're really authenticating with AWS. And so I'm actually going to switch back over now to the deck here. And here I'm actually going to look a little bit more at the workflow architecture. So as you saw, as a cloud admin, I actually went through and I created that AWS connector and I created my solution configurations. So that's all stored inside of our hybrid connectivity resource provider. And so before as those were being created, I uploaded this CloudFormation template. And this is really, once again, how we federate to AWS. And so once that's actually created, that's where that gets stored. And so after both of these things are done, that's when the internal operation on our service will come into play and we'll actually say, hey, it's time for the periodic sync to run. And so what we'll do is under the Arc identity operator, we'll actually call out to Microsoft Intra to get a bearer token that we can then use to authenticate back to AWS. So AWS will verify that this token is correct, verify that we're great, send a temporary access token back down. And then that is what really allows us to now be able to interact with these APIs. So doing those get calls on all the APIs. And in the case of EC2, we're actually able to onboard and install that Arc agent. And so after we have all of this information from the APIs coming down, we'll basically now come and then store that information inside of both the hybrid compute and the AWS connector resource provider. And so all of these things will stay up to date and they will be your Arc resources. And then, of course, the fun part after that is being able to now do whatever you want to do with it. Make sure that you onboard to the management services for your EC2 machines and provide that richness of queries through Azure Resource Graph, which I'm excited to show you a little bit more in depth here in just a second.
Yeah, these type of architecture diagrams really help to illustrate just kind of what's happening behind the scenes. And like the thing here is that this is thoughtful. It's not just a very simple implementations behind the scenes. Obviously for the user, it is simple as you just showed me in the demo, but behind the scenes, like the amount of things that are happening in order to make this happen always blow my mind when I'm working with all the product managers on these type of architecture diagrams and just kind of understand, the engines, like what are the things that are happening. And again, I said this before, I think that the theme for this, for this episode is all things API. That's really what I'm taking out of this in the context of how things work.
Yeah, you're exactly right. And it's all about that lightweight connection through these APIs. And it just makes it really easy for us. And we get such richness of data from the APIs that we can now project inside of Azure. So it is definitely exciting. And I'll definitely kind of showcase what this looks like in the portal. And so if I come over once again to Azure Arc and I get to my multi-cloud connectors here, I'm going to go ahead and click on a connector that has already been synced. And so here you'll notice that we've got the success status. The last time it was synced was today around 12:30. And if I come over to my resources over here, I can actually see all of these resources that have come through for my AWS account. I can easily group by type if I can see them, just to see it a little bit easier. And so I can even see I've got CloudFormation stacks, EC2 instances, the statuses, the network ACLs. If I come over to this next page, we'll even see things like S3 buckets. So if I drill into one of these, once again, you get this richness of data here, where it's not just a couple of information, but it's anything that we can pull from those AWS APIs, we project here on the Azure side. So this truly is a Microsoft.AWS connector S3 bucket. So a first class resource that you can even apply Azure tags on. And then you get, once again, this richness of data down below. And so this is something that we're really excited about. And then just to show one more example here, if I actually go back to an EC2 instance, I can see that there is one here. So I can actually see my instance ID. I can get all of this richness of data again for my EC2 instance. If I wanted to, I could even see this JSON view that has all of these different details regarding the AWS properties. If I just want to be able to copy this and to be able to even see what do I even have access to, it's all here for customers. And then if I actually take this instance ID as well, you'll notice that if I come back over to the Azure Arc view, if I go over to the machines blade, I actually can come over here and I can search for this instance. And here I actually can see that it's an Azure Arc machine. It's already connected. And so everything is looking good to where now I can go and I can use those management services. So I can see my cloud providers, AWS. I have all of this information too around the image that gets populated. And now I know I can have 20 pending updates that I should go and run. And so it's just really nice that all of this is done for me. I didn't have to go in and manually install this Arc agent on this machine, but the connector was able to go and do it, which is just exciting to see.
That's awesome. It's really exciting to see how far we come. I mean, when it comes to, these resources, the just looking at the JSON that is describing an S3 bucket, in Azure. I mean, that's just kind of amazing, because the amount of options, the possibilities, the reporting back that you can do with this type of information is just, definitely next step.
Yeah, exactly. And that's where even what we'll do too is inside of our public documentation, we have a lot of example queries that customers can now run to go and look at all of this information. So for instance, this is one that will just show me all of my resources that are a part of a given connector. So I can see what are the resource names, what's the type, what are the AWS tags, if I just want a simpler view through ARG. But once again, where this gets really rich is when you start writing these cross-cloud queries. And so, for instance, I can do an Azure and AWS VMs with all of their metadata. And so this, I have pulled out basically some AWS machines. And then if I scroll down here, I can actually see Azure machines. So it's nice to sort of see this split between Azure and AWS. And so this is just nice that I can see here's an Azure machine, here's an AWS machine, and then I can see the differences. The OS details are all here, the size is here, the state is here. And so it's just nice that I can have this sort of one-stop shop to do all of my queries. So that's an example for the VMs. And then last up is just an example for Lambda functions with Azure functions. And so here I can actually see for my AWS functions and my Azure, I can see actually the cloud, I can see the function name, when it was last modified, and the tags that are a part of those. So it just, again, creates that richness for you to be able to query cross cloud, which is exciting.
Beautiful. I'm loving it. It's I mentioned this before in this episode, but it's such an amazing to see the journey. That notion of if you're a real multi-cloud administrator, if you have multiple environments, and we know this because most of the customers, most of the enterprise today, they live in a multi-cloud universe. There's not a lot of enterprise customers that only have one cloud provider, and obviously AWS is there in the game. And just being able to do this correlation, that metadata, that information, the fact that it's lightweight, really blew my mind when it comes to the progress that we're making with Azure Arc. Thank you so much for this comprehensive demo, Meagan, and for the Jumpstart viewers, thank you so much for joining us. Make sure to like, subscribe, and we're gonna see you in the next one. Bye, everyone.